Good afternoon, everyone. I hope this is the first of many hours of fun this day around Charleston County Public Schools. Today, we talked about in the first board orientation of learning services, really focusing on our academics, history, and priorities, and areas where we were hoping to move forward in the future. This board training is really focused on the other side of what we think about as student achievement, and that's social, emotional, and supports in the school, and making sure that our kids are successful and they're getting the attention that they need beyond just in the academic space. I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Coker, who leads our Department of Alternatives program, so she can lead us through most of this content.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Board of Trustees members and CCSD staff. I am Jennifer Coker from the Department of Alternative Programs and Services. And I'm excited to share our work with you today on our journey to equity, school climate, culture, discipline, and support throughout CCSD. In the Department of Alternative Programs and Services, we believe in building relationships and making connections with all of our stakeholders. Today, we'd like to begin with a quick connection activity to show you how we do this and to also just learn a little bit about you today. So we're going to go around and ask each person to introduce themselves and to share one goal you have for today's training. So I'm going to model that for you. So again, I'm Jennifer Coker, Executive Director of Alternative Programs and Services. And one goal I have for today is to ensure you understand the work that we do for our schools, our students, and our families. And so I'll go to Ms. Waters.
Sure. I'm Courtney Waters, and one goal I have for today is just to learn more detail about the program and figure out how we can use whatever comes up from the questions to put forth in the board priorities that we're setting.
Thank you. Dr. Frazier?
Yes, ma'am. Of course, many of you already know that I'm a product of the system and worked in almost all of the alternative schools. And my goal today is to learn how we can stop the prison pipeline, which I think starts with our alternative programs and how we are warehousing children in those programs, and what do we do once they leave those programs to make sure that they are successful when they go back to their home school or when they go into the community.
Thank you, ma'am. Dr. French?
Hello, Dr. French and a new board member. I hope to learn a couple of things. One is with alternative programs, I want to understand better if they're being used to help students learn different ways to relate at school and do better at school, or if they're being used more as punishment programs. And the other thing that I'm really curious about is, do we have good tools for measuring development and social and emotional learning?
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Lauren Herdrick. My goal for today is to utilize this information along with all of our orientation sessions to be able to establish goals and priorities moving forward.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Coakley.
Good afternoon. My name is Erica Coakley. Everybody already knows, just coming out to, being a product of public schools, having a son that has autism, I'm very keen on social and emotional learning. So one thing I hope to take from today is lots of information that I could use within the community with you all to implement more changes, needed changes, to help you all be, the ear to my voice that wasn't being heard as I came through the school systems. So I'm intrigued about this session and early learning childhood, so figuring out ways that we can make all of this work together.
Thank you very much. We greatly appreciate that. That helps us to make sure that we highlight some of the things you asked about as we go through today. You can move forward, Maggie, please. As I mentioned, we're thrilled to walk you through the journey that we've been on to build equity in school climate, culture, discipline, and support throughout CCSD. Today, I want to talk about a call to action that we had in 2015-16 and review our process for systemic change, share our summary of progress to date, and review the next steps that we plan for the future. Throughout the training today, we'll pause for questions and strategies as we move throughout the presentation, because we're going to share a lot of information with you today. Go ahead and move forward, Maggie. Thank you. In February 2016, we were asked to take a deep dive into the discipline policies, procedures, and practices in CCSD, as well as review the data for all of our students. And the review yielded 3 major concerns. Lack of equitable access concerns. So we did not have mental health supports across the district or a system for wellness support. Few schools had a social emotional learning curriculum or focus, and there was limited availability of district supports or access to community supports. There was disparity among our data. African American students were suspended 88.5% of the suspensions, and that's 14% higher rate than their white counterparts. Our special education students are actually suspended at 14.8% higher rate than their general education counterparts. And in 15-16, there were 916 arrests across 37 schools. And greater than 30% of our students had discipline referrals, so a large population. We also found that there were inconsistent systems for discipline referrals, the format, the procedure, and the documentation, that we had procedural differences in our discipline hearings, and then we lacked a continuous improvement framework. Upon completion of this review, we brought a set of recommendations to the Board of Trustees on April 11, 2016. The approved items from that day are on the screen, and I'll go through them quickly. To design the Department of Alternative Programs to focus on prevention and intervention, and not just student discipline. To approve some restructuring in the alternative schools. To adopt multi-tiered systems of support, or MTSS, across our district, as well as positive behavior interventions and supports, PBIS, across our district. Approve a data management system so that we would have one singular system across CCSD. To adopt policies that we were working on, making sure they aligned with state and federal guidelines, such as weapons, drugs, alcohol, and electronic devices. To revise the code of conduct and create a progressive discipline plan, which we took to the board in May of 2016. And then to begin implementing restorative practices into our schools and continue development on our social emotional learning standards and curriculum. As we began that journey in 2016-17, many of these new initiatives started, but we had to roll out these changes in a very thoughtful way. So we focused our work on 3 phases to ensure that we were making a lasting impact on beliefs and actions. So first was to address policy. We needed to ensure that our policies were communicated, understood, and utilized. And then we moved to processes and procedures. With the revised policies came much needed procedural changes and guidelines so that we had all of our expectations in writing for our school teams and our district teams. And then we were able to move to people and professional development. So once we developed our policies and our processes, we could begin working to teach our administrators and staff how to implement the changes and to begin to shift the mindset to more equitable practices. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Megan Bocino. She's a school climate coordinator in our department, and she's going to go through a few of the strategic changes.
All right, good afternoon. Thank you for having us here today. So I plan to share key information and processes about our district-wide continuous improvement frameworks. Multi-tiered systems of support, known as MTSS, is an evidence-based framework that uses database problem solving to integrate academic, mental health, and behavioral instruction supports and interventions. The integrated instruction supports and intervention are delivered to students in varying intensities, so those multiple tiers, through a layered approach based on student needs and across environments, which is represented here visually with the triangle. Need-driven decision-making seeks to ensure that school resources reach the appropriate students and adults at the appropriate levels to accelerate the performance of all students to achieve and exceed proficiency. So every school operates through a central MTSS lead team and PBIS team. MTSS teams review school-wide data to identify trends, those strengths and weaknesses, and then implement changes in their systems to make improvements or build upon those strengths. There's a focus on ensuring high-quality instruction and intervention that is aligned across those tiers, and differentiation is provided. So for example, at a school level, using that data, a school that maybe identifies 75 out of 100 of their students failed the algebra end of course, realize that we look at that at a systems level, that tier 1 universal. We need to address the algebra curriculum and instruction, not individual students.
But just a clarification, so the teams are at each school, and then you have support from the district staff as well?
Yes, ma'am. And I'll talk to that a little bit in a couple slides. So positive behavior interventions and supports, PBIS, is a data-driven decision-making framework for establishing the social, cultural, and behavioral supports needed for a school to be an effective learning environment for all students. We use the 5 Ps when talking about PBIS, so it's designed to be proactive, positive, preventative, predictable, and those practices, developing those practices that are in place to support instruction and student engagement. So what does this look like at the school level? PBIS teams develop those school-wide expectations that are explicitly taught to students so they know what is expected in the appropriate behavior access across school settings. Some of our schools use the 3 Rs, like respectful, responsible, and ready to learn, or pride, prepared, respect, integrity, dedication, engaged. School-wide acknowledgement systems are used to praise students for meeting expectations, that appropriate behavior, and a continuum of response strategies are in place for discouraging problem behavior. Data is constantly reviewed and used for decision making. So at the school level, if a school's maybe going to set a goal to reduce the number of referrals for, say, disrespect or tardies, or you can insert a target behavior for the second quarter compared to maybe their first quarter data. And then school-wide celebrations could be earned. Those could look like student faculty basketball games, bonus field days, dance parties, etc., when that goal is met. Or another school, in reviewing their data, identified that their highest number of referrals were on the bus. So they brought in all of the drivers to teach about PBIS bus expectations, provided tickets for the drivers to use, and then invited all the students on the bus and the driver with the most tickets for the month to a special lunch and recognition at the school. So when school-wide PBIS is implemented well, students achieve improved social and academic outcomes, school experience the reduced exclusionary discipline practices, and school personnel feel more effective. So MTSS and PBIS were selected in CCSD to be the model for continuous improvement since they are nationally recognized tiered frameworks that focus on building positive learning environments to provide equitable, academic, and behavioral outcomes for all students. This work is driven by teams who use data to make informed decisions, are committed to a problem-solving process, and engage families in the community. In order to provide training and support the ongoing implementation and progress monitoring work of school teams, we have 9 district climate coaches assigned to all schools. The coaching supports are aligned to meet the needs of each school, and the coaches also collaborate with stakeholders in various departments to support district-wide efforts around school climate. So we currently use 2 tools to monitor the fidelity of implementation of both MTSS and PBIS, and to assist schools with their database decision-making and action planning. For MTSS, we use the SAM, the self-assessment of MTSS, and for PBIS, we use the TFI, the Tiered Fidelity Inventory. School teams complete each of these self-assessments once annually, and our target goal was set for district-wide implementation at 80%. Last year, the district's average of the SAM, so for MTSS, was at 76.4%, with an increase of 8.5% over the past 4 years. And for PBIS, so the TFI, was at 84.1% district-wide, with a gain of 23.1% over the past 4 years.
Excuse me, tell me, what does that mean? I don't understand that.
It's an instrument that asks the school level MTSS to self-assess how are we doing against the framework, and then we track progress against that on their growth goals over time. And it's institutionalized so that the MTSS and PBIS are used nationally, so we can compare ourselves to other systems that are using it. And we wanted to make sure that we got sort of the high level of the different tools so that then we could step back and see how they all fit together. But I understand there's a lot of acronyms, so we're trying to make sure that we are giving definitions and how they're used, even as we try to paint a picture of how it fits together.
Okay, so social emotional learning, or SEL, when implemented as a school-wide effort, is an important building block to those very important components of positive school climate. So even with the district-wide PBIS and MTSS frameworks now in place, we were still missing the evidence-based social emotional learning curriculum that would provide direct instruction to students on key skills necessary to being successful students and citizens. When all students learn foundational skills like empathy, managing emotions, self-regulation, and problem solving, and when adults are consistently modeling positive social emotional skills, it can lead to improved relationships, an increased sense of safety and support, and ultimately a more positive school climate for all. So CASEL, the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, who lead the way in SEL research, policy work, and providing resources to support pre-K through 12 SEL implementation nationwide, identified these 5 core competencies listed here. These competencies can be taught and applied at various developmental stages from childhood to adulthood and across diverse cultural contexts. So our journey toward district-wide SEL access began with the implementation of Second Step, which is endorsed by CASEL, and the 2017-2018 school year in all of our 4K early learning classrooms, and piloting the full school curriculum in 16 elementary schools and 3 middle schools. Each year we added a grade level in the elementary schools, and in 2019 added access for all middle schools. Currently, pre-K through second are at that 100% implementation level. Third through fifth, we have 85%, which third grade will be added, the curriculum in 2021 to continue with the grade level rollout plan. And all of our 6th through 8th grade middle schools are at 100%. At our high school level, Too Good is currently being implemented in 4 high schools during their advisory period. This curriculum provides opportunities for students to learn social skills through real-life scenarios, board games, and role play. We have begun student listening circles in order to promote student voice and hear directly from the students how they are feeling and what types of supports they may need. Several of our high schools are now using extended homeroom, advisory periods, or study halls to provide SEL lessons or complete community building activities. Schools are using the SEL roadmaps, K through 12, developed by a cross-collaborative team of CCSD staff over the summer, or some high schools have even developed school-based committees to do this work at the school level. For example, at Stahl, they call this tribe time. So moving forward in the spring of 2021, we are really excited to begin a partnership with Panorama, which assists schools and districts to support student and adult SEL with research-backed surveys and actionable data reports that'll also help us monitor our progress with SEL. So the Panorama Student Survey measures student perceptions of teaching and learning, culture and climate, and the student experience in the classroom and school. So student perceptions of their classroom experience will help us then identify a teacher's strengths and areas for teacher growth connected to that school-wide climate. So the student survey assesses 3 key areas. So that's skills and competencies. Example topics are going to include growth mindset, self-efficacy, social awareness. Key area 2, supports and environment. So things like sense of belonging, diversity and inclusion, and well-being. So positive feelings and challenging feelings. And then we'll also have access to the teacher and staff survey, which focuses on the well-being and adult SEL. So teacher and staff perspectives on their professional well-being, their work environment, and their capacity to support students' social emotional learning. And that includes like their well-being and their professional learning and knowledge about SEL. And additionally, this summer, we will move forward with targeted school team training to support the quality implementation, action planning, and continuous growth for our district-wide continuous improvement frameworks.
So that kind of gives you a sense of some of the supports that are in place. So why don't we do one round of questions so that we can kind of keep with it, and that way you won't have to hold your thoughts in your head. Do you mind if I start with Ms. Waters and I'll just go around and see where we are?
Sure. I have quite a few questions, but I guess the one that's coming up to me the most is there's a lot of this that, I mean, there's always a gap that we're seeking to fill between what we hope to be true with policy, being implemented, and then what actually happens in the schools. And I'm kind of always asking this question around training and development because in my experience as a teacher, it's normally very terse. You get a few moments after school ends, 50 minutes, maybe an hour, in the cafeteria, library, whatever. And then you're expected to go and implement these things. But what we know about dealing with behavioral issues, it's really the toolbox that you can work from in reacting. And if you have children, it's embedded in you. Like your impetus for the way that you respond to, to your child or whatever, it's all going to deal with what was in your toolbox. And so I'm wondering about the method and manner of the training or frequency of the training that happens. What's going to really ensure that there's a connection made between, I know I'm supposed to do this stuff, but how do I really do it when somebody is, throwing books across my room because they're mad that I told them to stop talking? You know what I'm saying?
So we will dig in a little bit later to the professional development, but it's done in a variety of manners. So we do some whole school professional development. We also do targeted teacher support based on principal requests. And then some of especially the SEL curriculum, there are videos that teachers can watch as well. And so our coaches that are supporting the schools can model lessons, or they can go in and observe teachers and give them feedback so that it's ongoing. It's not just one training and then you're on your own.
Awesome. And not to belabor, because I know we got to go around and keep going, but Ms. Belcher, really, I'm asking that question to also wonder if you all have thought about gaps in that and where we could be helpful. Like, is it a funding thing? Does there need to be more people? I'm really thinking about how we can help build out a system where training is as great as it can possibly be, because this is really important.
I appreciate that. I think it's a good conversation for us to have in light of the priorities this afternoon. One of the things that I'm impressed with as someone who came to the district last January is the MTSS focus had been all of the previous year. Like that was sort of the driving theme that drove a lot of the professional development that was led by Ms. Coker, Ms. Simmons, and Dr. Williams to make sure there was consistency. So that was covered repeatedly in professional development sessions, which I think led to a real understanding at the school level.
Awesome. Thank you.
Dr. Frazier?
I'm just going to hold my question because right now I'm lost. But maybe later on it'll all come to me. But right now I'm just trying to figure out how it all comes together.
Okay, fair enough. Dr. French?
Yeah, so it sounds like you have two different programs and the school maybe chooses one, MTSS or PBIS, or they do both?
No, MTSS is kind of like, we think of the big umbrella. It's going to look at that academics and the behavior. PBIS is really kind of that side of the umbrella that focuses on the behavior or social, emotional learning, mental health, and wellness. But we have both of those teams, and it's a two-way communication kind of feedback loop between your PBIS team and your MTSS lead team.
Okay.
And it's probably useful for us to break the habit of acronyms and say multi-tiered system of support. So that would include both academic supports as well as social emotional supports. Okay. And then the positive behavior interventions is really about having a positive choice option rather than a negative, like suspension, expulsion, that kind of thing. What are the different ways we can de-escalate behavior before it gets to that point?
Right, and so when you're using something like PBIS, and I know that we're also looking at trying out restorative practices in some of our schools, my impression is it's important to train all the staff people, not just the teachers, the cafeteria workers, janitorial staff, all of the people that are contacting the students. And like the example that was brought up about bus drivers, that was really great. But I also think that it has to be a system that can be modeled at the adult level. How is it being applied to the adults so that you're living it for each other as well as the students? Then it's more internalized. All the training that, like Ms. Waters was saying, you need to have ongoing training, but it's also about learning a different way of working together. How successful do you think that is happening?
Do you want to speak to the adult training?
So adult teamwork is a struggle at times because our adults in our schools are in their classrooms alone a lot. And so all of these frameworks, I don't want to say force, but encourage schools to come together and talk and discuss and work through problems, which is a lot of times why our professional development happens in the teacher learning community teams, which might be all the third grade teachers together, so that we can highlight some of the positive things certain teachers are doing and allow them to learn from each other. There's a lot of new research around adult social emotional learning that's just come out since the pandemic, and we actually are piloting an adult social emotional learning program in one of our schools to see how that works for the adults, because we've really seen that, especially right now, it's definitely needed for our adults. So that's another reason the Panorama survey that surveys adult staff members, we can have their perceptions and their feelings as well as the students, so then we can begin to create a better pathway to support our staff as well.
I believe that you mentioned that you have 9 district climate coaches. Are they in charge of the entire district?
Yes, I'll talk more specifically about them later, but those 9 are spread out across the district, attached to schools, different schools.
And what are their responsibilities?
I have a whole part of that I will answer in just a few minutes. If I don't, stop me then and I'll add.
Okay, thank you.
Mrs. Coakley?
So, again, I really don't have any questions, just comments, because social and emotional learning is very important to me. I took all my notes and I just sit here, and there's no need. You just speak the truth. So, and just be real about what it is that I understand and what I'm taking from this. So having my son with autism, and as I look, PBIS, I've been aware of, the MTSS, new, so I felt like that was something that I missed out on, but I'm hearing other people ask questions. I think sometimes our parents are not wanting to ask questions or quite understand, but right now what I see is the training, development, the coaches, representation matters. It really does matter. Student voices, the parent voices, they matter more to me, but as I look at this right here, it's like, this is something that I guess maybe I needed, and I wish that from the ground up level versus a top up level. Like Christian said, training, not just with teachers, but everybody that's involved. COVID leveled everything for everyone, and I hear you saying like for adults too. When I look at social and emotional learning and I compare it to what I'm learning from my son, or to my son, it's almost like, I feel like you don't understand it if you quite hadn't been there. So if these teachers that are in places aren't really understanding our children, if they don't know how to quite put things in place in order to help them, is what I'm saying. So my real life situations, and I'm looking at this right here, I think the pipeline, the prison, and just the right people are not there to help implement a lot of the things that I'm seeing right now. So after we get through the rest of it, I'll have more to say, but thank y'all very much.
Thank you. Is there other questions? I'm going to come down to Dr. French. Go ahead.
Yeah, so this is just something that I've been meaning to bring up and ask. Is there a way for board members to receive training? I'm particularly interested in the restorative practices, for instance. I wonder if that's something that we can explore, because I think it's helpful for all levels of our organization.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. We'll talk about restorative practices more in depth toward the end, but absolutely we would invite board members to attend those trainings if they wanted to.
Any other questions?
We have one
Ms.
more.
Waterstar.
How effective is the PBIS at the high school level? Or am I just thinking of it in a silo? Isn't PBIS typically like you do a good thing, you get a thing? Is it more, is it something you use more at the elementary level, or does it just totally look different at the high school level? I heard you mention the tribes. I know Mr. Kerr talked about that. I thought it was great. But like, how is that an iteration of PBIS?
So we do have it at all of our levels. I think that secondary level, we spend a lot more time focusing on the student voice and agency, so that the students are, active participants in reviewing data and part of that problem-solving process. And then, I would say when we look at our district-wide data, that has been our group that has made the most growth, because they weren't as experienced with the multi-tier system of support or positive behavior interventions and supports when we began implementing 4 years ago now.
And I would just add that it's not just, a lot of times we think it's an acknowledgement system, but it's really about establishing expectations and then creating a culture in the school that everybody talks about those expectations. And so in the high school, when Ms. Bacino mentioned student voice, it might be students creating a video on how not to be tardy to class. And so it looks a little different perhaps in high school, but The research is very solid that high schools can have positive effects. It does take a little longer in elementary and middle. The national average is 3 to 5 years to make systemic change, but in the high schools it's 5 to 7 years. So it takes a little longer to shift the mindset because you don't have little people, they're bigger people, and so people think that they know. We all kind of assume they have more skills than they do.
Thank you.
We're going to move on to cover the code of conduct and discipline.
We're going to go to Dr. Shabana Coakley.
Thank you, Ms. Coker. Good afternoon. I have the pleasure of speaking to you today about the Code of Conduct, the Progressive Discipline Plan, Review 360, which is our system for database management and collection, student discipline hearing, and the appeals process. The Code of Conduct is CCSD's guide for student discipline as given by the State Department of Education. We received the infraction titles as well as the code from the State Department of Education. However, the state does not tell schools how to implement discipline practices, procedures, and consequences for students. And for CCSD, this led to inequities and the assignment of consequences with little reteaching of our students.
Ms. Coakley, I'm sorry to interrupt. Would you mind moving your mic down just a little bit towards your mic?
Is this better? Okay. So in 2016, under the leadership of Dr. Postlewaite, we convened 2 teams consisting of district and school staff to review the Code of Conduct and to research how to develop a progressive discipline plan for every school to implement in CCSD. We started with 2 PDPs, the elementary and the secondary level. This work has now evolved into 5 PDPs. And as you can see on the screen, we have our committees, which addresses the progressive discipline plan at the elementary and the secondary level. Our members include principals, assistant principals, teachers, counselors, school psychologists, and district staff. It is important to note that although we have 5 progressive discipline plans, all PDPs have the same infractions listed, but consequences vary based on the age and level of the student. For example, the consequences for a 4-year-old who bites and a 13-year-old who bites are different. Age-appropriate consequences with reteaching. The progressive discipline plan allows us to address equity in our discipline practices and for us to work as a system to ensure students receive interventions and support as well as consequences for our process. So if we go to the next slide, you will see the links for the progressive discipline plan. All PDPs can be found on the CCSD website. They are live and available to parents, community members, and board. When we make changes, if you move to the next slide, please. When we make changes to the progressive discipline plan, they are also updated on the CCSD website. So in looking at the evolution of the PDP, you will see that our PDP team meets monthly, and each year there are revisions. Those revisions come from input from stakeholders within our schools, meaning our teachers, our principals. We also talk about what is it that our community is seeing. Our elementary and secondary project team submits those revisions, and the changes are updated based on state and federal regulations. Currently, there is a policy under sexual harassment that you all are viewing today. Once that policy has passed, there will be an additional update to the progressive discipline plan so that we are aligned to state and federal changes. So let's talk about our system of database management. When we looked at what database management system would be important for Charleston County School District, we wanted to find a system that would provide a robust data tracking system. We also wanted something that could be customized to align to South Carolina Department of Education state coding for student discipline and the CCSD Code of Conduct and Progressive Discipline Plan. Therefore, we selected Review 360. There are two main reasons for this selection. Number one, Review 360 supports the MTSS, SEL, and PBIS systems for our schools. The identified features allow our climate coaches, school administrators, and their support teams, and district leaders to commit to systems that provide a data-based problem-solving and progress monitoring approach for student behaviors, school-wide expectations, and changes. In addition to what I just stated, all referrals are electronic and they move with the student should they transfer schools. This referral are tracked by learning levels, so we have elementary, we have middle school, and we have our high school. And because we are able to track them by learning levels, we have reports that are instant, automated, and available to our schools. When looking at the current PBIS and MTSS and SEL systems for support, we understand that using Review 360, we can look at this data collectively as a school, or we can look at the data individually by students. We also can identify changes or trends across time, day, location, student, teachers, and more. Next slide, please.
Dr. Coakley, before you go to the discipline hearings, I just want to add one thing about the Code of Conduct and Progressive Discipline Plan, that we also took the Progressive Discipline Plans to the Student Cabinet and to the Parent Advisory Cabinet to review and get feedback and made changes off of that. I'm not sure that came out as much in what we said, but we are looking for input from all stakeholders when we make adjustments to the Progressive Discipline Plan. So, pardon me, Dr. Coakley.
That's okay. So we have the Code of Conduct, which is advised to us by the State Department of Education. We have the Progressive Discipline Plan that was created with a variety of stakeholders in mind and feedback, constant feedback that we receive from our schools. However, we all know that there are some students, regardless of the preventative and intervention methods provided, who would need additional supports. This support comes in the area of our discipline hearing process. So I want to talk with you about the two levels of the discipline hearing process because this is important for the work that you do. We have the first level, which is called our DAP hearing. The second level is our Constituent Board hearing. The DAP hearing is conducted by a hearing officer at the DAP office. The second level is called the Constituent Board hearing, and it includes elected officials serving as the hearing panel. So how was it decided which infractions would be heard by DAP and which infractions would be heard by our constituent boards? All constituent board administrators were brought together to decide which infractions, so we're talking about the board chairs. The constituent board chairs were brought together to decide which infractions would be conducted by the hearing officer at the DAP level and which would be brought before the constituent board. The two main differences in a DAP hearing and a constituent board hearing is number one, a DAP hearing will never result in an expulsion from school. This can only be done at the constituent board or countywide board level. And number two, DAP hearings take place during the school day with the hearing officer, the school administrator, the student, and the parent present. Some of our possible outcomes that you see on the slide for our hearings can be probation, expulsion, 365 days, which is applied to any student who brings a gun onto a school campus, expulsion with services, which is applied to our students who receive special education services, ADAPT, our alcohol, drug, alternative programs for teens, community service, letter of apology, and more. We provide training throughout the year. We provide one collaboratively We also provide them by constituent boards, and we receive requests. There's an appeal process in place for a DAP hearing and a constituent board hearing. If a school or student attends a DAP hearing and chooses to appeal the decision of the hearing officer, that appeal process would take place at the constituent board level. If a school chooses to make the appeal, guidance is provided by the level leader of that school. If the appeal takes place at the constituent board level, the appeal would go to the county-wide board with all hearing materials provided to you. The decision is made and returned to the school, DAP, and the parents. At this time, I would like to pause and allow you to ask any questions you may have about the Code of Conduct, Progressive Discipline Plan, Data Management System, or our discipline hearings.
This time, let's start with Dr. Frazier, if any questions about these topics.
Yes. My question, is there any way, and I don't know how to say this, to make this less confusing and less convoluted for parents? And I just finished a stint with the Constituent School Board, and we had a book about this thing to go by so that we could understand it. How do we expect our parents to understand this code of conduct when it is so huge? And do we expect them to go to the website to find out? I mean, how does that translate into parents understanding everything that we're talking about here?
I appreciate that, Dr. Frazier. I think one thing to think about is that one of the challenges of these kind of documents is they have to vary depending on the age group of kids. So an offense that happens when a child is in kindergarten or pre-K should have a different consequence or intervention, obviously, than older kids. So as I think Dr. Coakley well articulated, we started with a very basic approach of elementary, secondary, and we ended up having a much more nuanced approach around the bus, early childhood, upper elementary. And so I think one of the challenges is making sure that parents are looking at the discipline code that's relevant for their particular child at their particular age group, and seeking out resources at the school level that can help talk them through that. Ideally, we wouldn't get to the discipline plan. We want to try to make sure that we're intervening before we get to that point. Dr. French, do you have any questions?
But you didn't answer my question. My question is, how are parents accessing this information?
I'm sorry, how are parents what?
Are they responsible for going to the website to try to understand the discipline plan, or how does this work for parents?
So the Code of Conduct is available in print for parents at the school levels if they would like it. We have English and Spanish versions. And some schools have, we do not have copies of all the progressive discipline plans at the school because they're lengthy, but I do know that a lot of administrators will print out certain pages for parents to see how that works. And we also encourage our school teams to have part of their PTSA or back to school night to talk about the Code of Conduct and their expectations around positive behavior as well. So those are some ways that parents can get that information, but they are available in print as well. And schools can request as many in print as they want. Some schools send them to every single parent, and some schools with their SIC teams, School Improvement Council teams, have decided to use the online version, but they can order as many as they want from us.
Do you have any questions, Dr. French?
Yeah, well, one of the things that I was wondering about is I recently learned that some of the disciplines in the Code of Conduct are state mandated. And so are those handled at the DAP level or constituent board level?
I missed the first part of that question.
The state mandated.
Oh, state mandated. So all of the code, the state does have a document that tells us which codes need to be considered at which level. So we have teacher managed referrals as well as level 1, level 2, and level 3. Level 3 offenses, a lot of those are the state mandated codes that are potential expulsion hearings. And so when the constituent board chairs met, we went through all of those level 3 offenses, and the board chairs voted on which ones they thought should come straight to them and which one should come to the Department of Alternative Programs hearing officers. So there's a few level 3 offenses that do come to us, disturbing school, cyberbullying, bullying, and maybe one more that I'm forgetting.
Assault.
Simple assault was what the chairs had decided. So at this time, that's still what we're operating under. Those couple of codes come to us, and the rest of those level 3s go to the constituent boards. Multiple level 2 offenses, so refusal to obey, profanity, those come to the Department of Alternative Programs office because those are not considered expellable offenses by the state, so they come to our office first, and then we do the hearing process. That doesn't mean a student couldn't be elevated to the constituent board because they maybe were on probation and had another of those referrals, and then that would be elevated to the constituent board. Does that answer your question, ma'am?
I think so. I guess part of what I'm wondering is, so if there's an offense and the decision is that you have to recommend expulsion, for instance, is there a way to appeal it? Are you appealing whether or not the offense occurred at that situation, or are you appealing the punishment or the consequence, I should say?
So the only offense that has a required expulsion is a handgun or a type of gun on campus. That is required by federal law, 365-day expulsion. All other offenses, the recommendation is for expulsion, but there is some leeway for our principals and their level leaders to determine that that course of action is not exactly what they want to do yet. They might be in the middle of doing some problem solving with a student, so they can determine not to send that forward for a hearing, but they would need to make sure that they noted that decision and why. It's not required every single time, but you've got to have finite reason why you're not doing that, just so that we can stay aligned across the district. But there are times when it's not appropriate based on some other problem solving that's been going on with that student or some work that's in progress.
Ms. Herderick?
I'm going to hold my questions for the end. I need a little bit more clarity on roles and responsibilities.
Cool. Mrs. Coakley?
I just want to say, if I never say anything else, about anything else social and emotional, I believe very well. I just feel this very much, and I'm going to leave it at this. How am I feeling today? Someone asked me that today, and I said sometimes it's okay to not be okay, right? But honestly, if I told you how I was feeling today, I'm quite sure most of you would look at me and be like, I can't even believe you're sitting here right now. And I say that to say, when I ran for this, coming up as a product of public school systems, abused as a child, came from broken homes. Like, I know every one of the things and probably more. Sometimes I feel like one person deals with one, but then you never find that one person that deals with multiple. I started my own nonprofit just to help because I understand the brokenness. And I felt like there aren't people representing me that really understand me enough to know that if I'm sleeping on my desk or if I'm tardy, it's because I helped my 2 little sisters get up and I walked to school. When your chartered schools made my parents feel like that they were accommodating us by picking us up further out from a home school that was right there. Or if I'm not learning, and that's what I keep saying, being Black, first of all, is trauma enough. As I have come through and as I put my children through these schools, making them conform to what it is, and I'm not saying you, but people that don't look like me, rules. People that don't look like me, education. People that don't look like my children, criteria. So when I say community and representation matters, when our communities is not representation of the people that we are disciplining or trying to educate, that's why we have this entire gap. Not only was I physically abused, and again, as I do things and say things, I hope you not only listen, I hope you also take it into real consideration. Physically abused, but also sexually abused. People deal with them differently. Resources, the foundation. School was my getaway. I was in predominantly white schools, and if no one's ever heard me say, school was my getaway from things that were going at home. But even in school, I was teased. I was ostracized by predominantly white teachers. I was ostracized by my black friends, and I was left aside by my white friends. When you don't have teachers, and then all of that's broken, and then that foundation, so then, you know, all of that. So when I'm listening to the data and the criteria, I was a part of that data and criteria, but I was missed. However, you're still testing, and you're still disciplined, and you're still educated. So that's why I wonder sometimes, who you're asking. And when you're asking them, what are you doing with that information? And once we get that information, how are we actually utilizing that information? So as I make sense of this entire running for school board campaign, making it and looking at education from everything, this right here is the biggest part of our education. Not COVID, not the allocations of new contracts. This is the heart of not just CCSD, but Charleston County, South Carolina public school systems. From here all the way up, this is the beginning. Social, emotional, trauma, stressed. So when I say focus on the small things and the bigger things, our graduation rates, expectations, achievements, success levels, everything that you guys are asking for, pushing for, wanting for, is based off of all of this. So going forward, if I never say anything else, as much input, as much help, as much more understanding that I can help my colleagues get from the social emotional, if they don't get it, from a community standpoint also. Kaleidoscope wasn't an after-school services that was provided or organized by anyone that looked like me, which is why I never put my kid there, and I hate to say that. But just use that as an example, and what I'm saying right now, representation, people in the community, start here all the way up, and everything else will fall into place. So thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Ms. Watterson, any questions? Dr. Fraser, any more questions?
Yes, I hear what you're saying, Ms. Coakley, because when I look at the panel and I look at the data, and I see that most of the people who are in this system are African-American males, but when I look at who's presenting, they do not represent the people that they're putting into these programs. And so at some point in time, I wish you all would just think about it. I see all female, mostly white females, doing the presentations here. And when you look at our alternative programs, look at who's in there, black males. And unless we start addressing the disparities at your level, then we're going to continue to have problems. And so I just want you to just think about it. But I am really, really troubled when I look at all of the females sitting here. I don't see any representation of black males talking about the problems that we're having with discipline in our schools. And I have some issues. I hear what you're saying, Ms. Coakley. And I'll be addressing it at a later date on another level.
Appreciate your comment.
Really quickly just chimed in on that. Everything that I told you guys, and I'll say, everything that I did go through in school, guess what? I've never been expelled. I was never suspended. I never met my constituent boards. I was never placed up for expulsion. And what I used to tell my kids was because I was smart, gifted, and talented, I did my work. I was good enough, and I was smart enough to ask questions, and they couldn't expel me or get rid of me for inquiring or wanting to know. And I was always assistant to someone else. It's always like we're good enough, but not good enough to be here. So like you said, you know, there are no men here, and as much as I went through, and you never know if I didn't tell you, everything that I went through, I never got expelled, and I never got suspended from school. never was reprimanded. I learned to forge my father's signature on report cards that I got straight A's on. I didn't have to, but he was so busy at work sometimes and just too tired and said, oh, I know you're passing. So when I graduated with honors, 2 diplomas, 4.0, 3.0 on a 4.0 scale, when I did all of that, and my father wasn't at my graduation, everything that I ever done, I felt like it was a waste. So even when we have children that are achieving, trying, but just need that extra push, foundational skills, representation, and people that actually care really do matter. So thank you.
Thank you. Let's, we'll continue to paint the whole story, I think, because I want to make sure we get all the information out. But I think one of the things that I'm hearing goes to our conversation this afternoon about priorities. Like we certainly, especially the people in this room, clearly it's men are at multiple levels of the system absent right now. But I think one of the things that I think is so important is the diversity in the system is reflected at every level of the system. And so some of the priorities that we're talking about in terms of talent really matter, as do cultural competency, so that no matter what you look like, you're more aware of cultures that are similar to your own as well as different than your own. And behavior, I think the only thing I'll say is I think it all matters, right? Discipline matters, how we treat kids and having relationships, and academics matter, so the kids have a sense of self-efficacy and knowledge and skills to help them in the world. And we have places to grow and some real strengths. I think you're going to be pleased to see where we bring the data, if we can bring that home. So, Mrs. Coker, I'm going to ask you to continue, if that's okay.
Sure. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time going over the alternative programs that we have in Charleston County. So we have probably more than you think. You can advance the slide, please, one for me. First is Clark Academy. This is our only academic alternative program. It focuses on accelerating students to graduation. It's an application-only program where we look for students that are in need of a different high school environment for various reasons. They can be overaged for high school. They could be underaccredited for their age. They could have attendance or truancy concerns. They may just need a smaller high school. And we also have an overaged 8th grade program there that students apply for, and so they may just want to get a leg up on high school. The program can hold 150 students, and last year had 23 graduates out of their program. So it is a program to accelerate students to graduation. And we also have Turning Point Academy, and this was developed by a committee of stakeholders that involved board members, community members, and district staff and principals to create a shorter-term alternative program. And so the Turning Point Academy is located on 3 campuses across CCSD. There's one in Mount Pleasant, one in West Ashley, and one in North Charleston. And students can be assigned there via hearing, either a Department of Alternative Programs hearing or a Constituent Board hearing. And for middle school students, they're assigned for 30 days, and for high school students, they're assigned for 45 days. And they have goals, and as long as they meet their goals at the end of that, they are restored back to their school with a restoration meeting, and the staff at Turning Point connect with them for the first 9 weeks that they return through meetings and virtually, so that we can get them reacclimated. And they also have an in lieu of suspension program there, so students in grades 6 through 12, rather than being suspended, can attend the focus program and get academic support from a teacher rather than being home and being suspended. And so that program started in the spring of 2017. Next, we have the programs that most people know about. That would be Daniel Jenkins Academy, which is for our 8th through 12th graders, and Liberty Hill Academy, which is kindergarten through 8th grade. There are 2 components in each of these schools. One component is the in lieu of expulsion component, where students are assigned there through hearing processes, but they also have a day treatment program for students on the end of our special education continuum. And so there are separate programs inside each of those buildings. Students in these 2 alternative schools earn points and move up levels to exit the program. And both of these schools are restorative practice schools and are implementing some of those restorative practice skills across their schools. And all of the staff there are also trained in crisis prevention intervention. We have additional counseling supports there. We have 2 school counselors at each school, and we have a clinical counselor that serves both schools. And over the past 3 years, that's a fairly new position. That person has served 248 students, and he has 70% of them have been referred back in less than that during that school year to their home schools, and he follows them back at their home school. And then we also have Department of Mental Health counselors on site. When students earn their way to level 5, a restoration meeting is held at their home school through a restorative process where we talk about the harm that was caused at the school and what the student has learned in the alternative programs. And our restoration specialist follows that student back at the home school and checks on them and visits them and works with the administrative team at the home school to ensure that their transition back to school is a good one. And so those two programs mirror each other. The average stay at those programs is about 100 days. It can be done in 50 if the student is really on point and earning their points each day. And some students stay a little longer. And occasionally we have students who do request to finish the year with us because of their success, particularly if they're in a transitional grade, like an 8th grader who's going to go to high school or something like that. Sometimes the parents and the students will ask us to stay, and we will make arrangements if that's their request. We also have some other programs that are probably less known. The Juvenile Detention Center, we support the students who are in the local Juvenile Detention Center through CCSD staff, and that would be Charleston County and non-Charleston County youth in the detention center. We support Wynwood Farm, which is a residential treatment facility for boys ages 6 to 16 with a full-time set of teaching staff there. And we also support the MUSC STAR program, which is a day treatment program that we work with the Medical University of South Carolina, and we provide the teaching staff at that program for the students. So every member of the Department of Alternative Programs leadership team has either been a school principal or an instructional coach, and so we all know from our lived experiences how difficult it was previously to find supports for students. So as a principal, I had to go out and look for things rather than having a centralized system to find those supports. So that is the main reason we asked for the board support in 2016 to be prevention and intervention and not just discipline, because if you don't have the first part, all you end up doing is disciplining students and you're missing out on an opportunity. So we created a way for our schools and principals and guidance counselors to request support directly from our office, aside from the folks who go to their building on a weekly basis. So through that support request mechanism, over the last 4 years, we've responded and processed 2,079 support requests, and they are for various things, sometimes for truancy. Our truancy coordinators, we have 2 of them, have created district-wide procedures, and they have a hearing panel for truancy, which is a level so that we don't send kids to family court for truancy, where we have our community partners, Department of Social Services, Juvenile Justice, Communities in Schools, and other partners come together and meet with the family and us to talk about what can be done to support the students coming back to school. We've had 233 of those cases processed in the last 2 years. That's a fairly new thing for us. And our truancy numbers are down by 1,200 students over the last 4 years. We also developed an alcohol and drug program for teens. And so we've served 765 students in that program over the last 4 years and created a tobacco education program in partnership with the Charleston Center. We also get requests to support homebound for students, as well as professional development, which we'll talk about in a few moments. And then we have individual teacher support requests that principals can turn in to us if they have a need for classroom management or for somebody to model or support them. And then we do home visits, of course, and other school-based requests. We also pride ourselves on being responsive to the district needs. And so over the last few years, we've had a couple of special projects that we've undertaken in our department. Currently, we're working on student engagement teams to really help schools dig into the virtual students who are perhaps struggling to engage with the school and the school work. And so we're actually working with them to identify those families and go out and meet with them in their homes and ask them what barriers there are to education and providing services while we're there, if it's internet or if it's supplies. We've also worked on locating the students that schools could not find throughout COVID and also at the beginning of this school year. We instituted a family support line last summer. We do listening circles for adults and students. We formed a bullying task force to look at our bullying curriculum. We also have a trauma-informed task force that's developed training that we're partnering with the D. Norton Center on. And then we also work with the cultural competency team. And then we have prevention and intervention facilitators in our office. We have 2, one male and one female, who work with students who are assigned board probation, but they are going back to school. And so they meet with these students weekly or bi-weekly, communicate with the students, the parents, and the administrators. They collaborate if they're in any kind of drug and alcohol programming, And then they also work with them on what's your college and career focus, what are you thinking about, and then if they need any letters of support, as well as monitoring their grades and their discipline and asking them whatever needs they may have. So they meet with them on site or virtually, depending on the students. You can go to the, we're good there, okay? No, that was right, you were on the right one, sorry. So a little bit more about our climate coaches, our social workers, and our behavior specialists, a little bit more detail into what these folks do for us. So we have 9 climate coaches. Their caseloads range from 5 schools to 13 or 14 schools, and that's based on the needs of the school and the amount of support that those schools need. They have attended almost 3,000 planning sessions and meetings with schools or teacher team meetings, and they provided 958 professional development trainings over the last 4 years. And they work directly with the multi-tiered system support and PBIS positive behavior support teams at the school, as well as help the schools with data analysis and look at their social emotional learning implementation. And so they can do observations and they can model lessons, as I've already said earlier. And then we have 10 social workers within our department. They have anywhere from 2 schools to 20 schools, depending on the needs of the schools. And they've connected with 2,125 students and families over the last 4 years, and we didn't have 10 that whole time. We'll talk about that in a minute. And they do obviously direct student support and direct family support and can connect them to resources. And then finally, we have 4 behavior specialists in collaboration with the Department of Exceptional Children. And they provide direct support for students who are having severe behavioral issues or teachers that are teaching and having trouble with behavior management. And so they provide direct support to students or teachers. And they work on functional behavior plans with the teachers and the staff. And then they also do modeling and support for the teachers. And they have worked with 424 different students over the last 4 years. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Tasha Joyner, who's our project officer for the Project Prevent Grant and one of our restorative practice trainers.
As mentioned earlier, the journey that we are focused on changing a system, which means we must change hearts and minds. To do this, our department offers monthly professional development across 3 targeted areas. The first area is culture and climate, which focuses on relationship building. This includes restorative practices, listening circles, trauma-informed practices, social emotional learning, second step curriculum, and the CCSD roadmaps. The next targeted area is professional growth, which is skill building. That includes our Super 6, which is our classroom management, MTSS, lead team, Review 360, training, videos, and self-paced and action planning. Also looking at our Review 360 behavior plans, youth mental health first aid, crisis prevention, and intervention. And our third targeted support is school teams, which is creating focus teams within the school buildings to include MTSS summer planning, our attendance and truancy teams, homebound, verbal de-escalation training for all staff, PBIS team lead sessions, and discipline teams looking at coaching school admin. Our professional development can occur across the district in large groups or in the small teacher teams as a school. Next slide, please. Restorative practice. The beginning of our restorative practice implementation started in August of 2016. It's important that you know the fundamental hypothesis of restorative practice is that human beings are happier, more cooperative, and productive, and more likely to make positive changes in their behavior when those in positions of authority do things with them rather to them or for them. This is a proactive approach, which is 80% of the work, that includes social norms or agreements, relationship building, and community building activities. There's also a focus on what healthy relationships look like, sound like, and feel like. Currently, we have 4 schools that have full implementation, which is Northwoods Middle School, Liberty Hill Academy, Daniel Jenkins Academy, and Turning Point Academy. And we have 5 schools who have partial implementation, which is St. John's High School, Lucy Beckham High School, Hunley Park Elementary, C.E. Williams North, and the Community Montessori. We are proud to say that in our restorative practice journey, we have trained a total of 597 participants in day 1, which is Intro to Restorative Practice, day 2, which is Using Circles Effectively. We've trained 313 staff members, and in day 3 and 4, which is Facilitating Restorative Conferences, we have trained 36 people. We have also created a first 10 days with restorative practice document that is used for trainees as they continue, and we will continue to distribute this as we fine-tune it while it is being utilized in our buildings. As you can see, some of our next steps is to, of course, grow the number of schools. So we are cost neutral for our schools because we are planning to increase our trainer cohort for days 1 and 2 from 16 trainers to 28, and we will have a training cohort of 12 people for days 3 and 4. So we will have trainers within our district that can train on days 1, 2, 3, and 4. We are also looking to designate a restorative practice coordinator and to offer training monthly during the school year and weekly during the summer.
Ms. Joyner, I'm going to stop us there because we're a little short on time. If you'll quickly to the next slide for me. We don't want to downplay this, and Ms. Joyner was probably excited to talk about this. This is our Project Prevent grant. A lot of the information you need to have on this grant is on the slide. And so please make sure to take a note of that. It's really exciting grant work that we're doing. If you can advance one more. So we've been really lucky throughout the last few years to have support of the board through Mission Critical, as well as some grant funding that we, in the 15-16, you can see the support we had for schools, but now you can see on the right what we have currently in this school year. And so we have increased our ability to support schools throughout the last few years. And then the next slide, please, Maggie.
But I really wanted to hear a little bit more about restorative practices.
Oh.
So why was she cut off? That was important to me.
We want to make sure we cover it all, but right now we're at 1:45 and the next workshop starts at 2. So that's where I'm struggling a little to try to figure out how we can cover it all, ma'am, and make sure we get the data. We can always schedule additional time to make sure that we can follow up, because we don't want to cut short shift to any of it.
That was not done appropriately. That was rude. The way you all cut her off like that.
I'm sorry. That probably is definitely my fault, if anything else, because I wasn't paying sufficient attention to the time, because I want to make sure we're respecting your time to get through everything we have to do today. And I would want to make sure that I say that these women up here on the panel are truly the leaders of this.
What she had to say was just as important as anyone else, and that was just rude the way you all cut her off like that.
Well, as I was about to say, ma'am, this truly is the leader up here who have done all the work for this work. Ms. Joyner and has led the Project Prevent grant. It would not be at the status it was without her leadership, so I certainly would not want to send that message. I think the issue is that the rest of us, probably me, talked too much, so forgive me. Let's make sure, I do want to make sure that we don't leave with a bad taste in our mouth, though, because part of the goal is to show that we've made significant progress. And maybe we could just go to the data, and then we'll make sure we'll schedule a follow-up so we can do it more deeply in a restorative practice, because I think it's one of our priorities coming out in this next conversation to see if we can make it broaden the presence of restorative practice across the system.
You can advance, please, Maggie. So obviously we're still on our journey through this process. We wanted to go back to the data we presented in 2015-16, data that I shared at the beginning, and show you where we are now. So we had access concerns, and we now have global mental health contracts where any student in our district can access mental health. We've increased the number of students working with mental health by 569 students over the last few years. We've already talked about our district-wide social emotional learning curriculum and the increased supports in our office to schools. We have seen a small decrease in the percentage of African Americans receiving suspensions. It's down by 8%. The disproportionality rate is actually down by 2.8% between African Americans and white students. Our special ed students, the disproportionality is down 1.5%, and our arrests are down 52%. And we've increased the amount of students with no referrals to over 80%, which is about 5,000 students less receiving referrals each year. And we've created systems that we've talked about as Review 360, the procedure manuals, and district-wide supports. While we've seen progress that we're proud of, we're not satisfied. We knew at the beginning of this journey there would be no quick fixes, but we continue to be committed to the change, committed to changing hearts and minds and the statistics. On behalf of my team, we thank you for your attention and appreciate the board's support in the past and are happy to answer any additional questions you may have at this time.
If people don't have specific questions, would it be appropriate to use the question time to go back to the restorative practices piece?
Sure.
If the rest of the board is okay with that.
If you could go to slide 27.
Which one is it?
Yes. So as we're continuing our journey, one of the things that I did mention is that day 1 and day 2 is the intro to restorative practice, where you learn about the skills, you learn the theory behind restorative practice and what it looks like, not only with you, there's also a portion of it that is a self-reflection of how you interact with other people. The next part of that is using circles, which is what I mentioned as far as building community, not only with your colleagues, with your family, but also with students. And again, focusing on those preventative, proactive, is 80% of that work that we do. Also, it looks like having circles where we're talking about what do you like. We always start with social norms and social agreements, so that everyone that's a part of the circle is aware of what the expectation is. We have aligned this with schools, with our restorative practice schools, with their matrix that we spoke about earlier, which is with PBIS, with what it looks like and what it sounds like. There are also opportunities for that 20% when harm has occurred, that the relationship has to be restored. And so why we focus 80% on building the relationship, because it's hard to restore something that never was there. Days 3 and 4 we utilize for our non-teaching staff, because as we go through the continuum of restorative practice, it requires more people and more time, and it's just appropriate at that time to facilitate once harm has occurred, which we go through a series of questions where we talk to the person that has been harmed and the person that has done the harm. And so we are very excited that we are going to grow that training so that we are going to build the capacity within our district, that we are trained through the International Institute of Restorative Practice, which is IRP. We will have our own trainers that work with CCSD. One of the other things that we're super excited about is the document that I mentioned, that it is given to participants so that they know what it looks like and what it sounds like to start off restorative practice the first 10 days of school, which includes activities, games, and getting to know you activities. We most recently met with the Hunley Park staff, as well as the leader that has led us in a direction that we are super excited about, because oftentimes people come to a professional development and they're looking for what to do next. What is something that is a takeaway that I can go right back into the classroom or right back into my school building and utilize it. And so we are bringing that as a part of our continuation of the first 10 days. And so as we mentioned, we will be offering training beginning in March. As you all know, due to COVID and because of social distancing, we have been able to have training, but we have been limiting it to 15 participants. But we are looking to grow our monthly trainings and looking forward to the summer where we'll be able to have more training. And so we're super excited about that work.
Thank you so very much.
Do you want to share about the checklist for schools who are interested?
Yes. So what we have done is, because people are very interested in being a restorative practice school, just like with anything else that we do with the Department of Alternative Programs and Services, we believe in checks and balances and the fidelity of a model. And so we have worked with the person that actually trained us to look at a checklist, which includes that you have someone on your staff that is a certified trainer, that you have a restorative practice kind of look for team that is someone that can come in that is school-based, that can look at, can co-teach, can co-model, very similar to our social emotional learning curriculum, but that also they are the go-to person that if you need assistance. And so we are creating a checklist that has those requirements, that they will go through days 1, 2, 3, and 4 of training, and that they are a part of our training team. And so we're not only trying to build the capacity at our school level, but we're also trying to build our capacity across the district.
I hope this is a quick question. So you've been doing this for almost 5 years, and it's still just in 9 schools. And I know that it takes a while to implement something that's important, but I also know that people from the outside feel impatient about it. And I'm wondering, what you're telling us, how well will you be able to ramp this up to all of our schools instead of just the first 10%? And what would you need from us to provide you the supports to do it successfully and a little more quickly?
Okay. So we've only been doing restorative practice training with our trainers for 3 years. We had to take a year to get a set of trainers here, so we've really only been full implementation for 3 years. And so what we found is we actually had a couple more schools who said they wanted to, but there wasn't buy-in from the whole school population of staff, and so they struggled. And so that's one of the reasons that Ms. Joyner talked about the checklist, to make sure that we have complete buy-in from the staff. And so if a school's interested, we go, and usually Ms. Joyner or I go and talk with the staff about what it looks like. So you saw we mentioned we're going to designate one person to work on restorative practices as their only job. Currently, right now, we share the responsibility. And obviously, we have other responsibilities, so we feel like having a targeted person who can set up the training and the planning will be really important. And so once we get our next cohort of trainers, we'll have 28, which is we can do a lot of training in-house. And so we feel like that will really help us to move forward this initiative. And we also are requiring all the folks that join our team in Department of Alternative Programs to at least go through the training so that they're familiar with it. And then we offer for them to become trainers if they're interested, so that everybody in our department can speak to the work if there are questions. And so really it does take time for a school to implement. There are 2 full days of training for the entire staff, and then additional 2 days for more staff members. And so it is a slow process to get this moving. And we're working with an outside consultant to come in and do some problem solving right now with some school teams around their needs. And so we're finding that to be very helpful in the absence of having someone in charge of restorative practice solely. So we think that will be a big game changer for us. Did I miss anything, Ms. Joyner? No.
Can I say something? And I just, real quick, and then I'll just let all of this go. Again, if I never say anything else, no, I'm listening, and I always got input, and I like learning, social, emotional learning. Real life, having my children, I always say, if you don't understand, make it make sense. This entire day, everything we discussed, the cutoff that we just saw within the restorative practices, hearing that restorative practices have only been introduced for the last 3 years. Look at where I'm at right now. It's one of these things when we say that certain people, children, especially Black women, being aggressive, loud, and outspoken. We need to understand why. Today, after we make sense, we skipped over something that we just started 3 years ago, that had I been introduced to restorative practices, who knows the success level that it could have had on me, because you cut that off. Piggybacking off of Dr. Frazier, for her not to know, and like she said, we see a panel of women, just all women, and we're making decisions about men, and then we have the 3 white women talking about African American studies and things that could be done, and then we just have my sisters over here just kind of reading off the paper. You know what I mean? It's just one of those things when I say representation really does matter. How we're treated really does matter, even in school, even in the workplace. How are things being prioritized? How do we stop the disparities, the inequalities, pipeline the prisons, ACEs? Yes, I feel like we should be more proactive and less reactive, and if I learn to use my voice a little bit more, I want everyone to understand, not just black people, not just white people, but we need to stop accepting I think what is like normal as being like a pat on the back, good job, and just take it as what it is. It is what it is. When we say microaggressions, it's just one of those things, oh, you look nice today. I'm not sure what you expected of me. So we need to stop expecting less of everyone, not just black, not just white, not just our poor children. So I think we need to switch around our expectations. And I hear a lot of teacher in meetings, but I'm hearing none of parental involvement. I don't want my children, as I be the voice for my child and be the voice for other communities, I am very big on parental accountability and parental involvement. And I want to make sure that I want to help bring parents to the table, hold them accountable. But not only are we bringing them to the table and holding them accountable, we're also including them. If we include everyone in the decision-making process, whether it's discipline, curriculum, policies, when we include them and we have a choice and say so on what it is that you may want or expect, the outcome levels could be tremendously different. Because you can't expect water from a turnip, right? And if you got a classroom for the turnips, you want water, you're not going to get it. But if you tell that turnip what you want and you include that turnip and tell me turnip what I want from you, then that turnip's going to give you what it is that you want. So help me, let me help. Bring my community, bring my parents, bring my families, bring my kids, to let them know how important and make them understand more what social and emotional learning is, because I don't think a lot of parents really know, especially if you don't have a child that does not have autism, and I mean that. And if you haven't experienced, if you haven't been through something. And in a nutshell, let you go today, what I'm dealing with, my brother-in-law is in the hospital in ICU. We didn't expect him to live the last 2 days, but he's still there. I've lost 2 people due to COVID, since we've been dealing with COVID. And everything that we are talking about as far as social and emotional learning, that I went under the radar, never being tested, never seeing a psychologist, but still being resilient enough to be here to bring attention and say, you know what, sometimes the old way wasn't working and we have to change it. But when we change it, we have to change it to make sure it fits, the expectations are real, and that the people that are actually making what it is that you want are the ones that have been there. I've never been to counseling because I said, you know what, if you haven't been there, you don't understand it, if that makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate the time for everyone. And we'll schedule a follow-up to make sure that people's questions get answered more clearly. I know we're going right into the next session. I'm going to turn it over to Reverend Max so we can quickly wash the tables, though, as we transition.